First of all, I want to thank Najenda Madavaram, who's the host of BetterMoCo, for inviting me to conduct this interview with County Executive Marc Elrich. And Marc, thanks for agreeing to speak with me today. So we'll start off with talking about COVID. And our county has had the highest success rate of any large county in the United States. How do you account for that, especially given that a majority of the county population are minorities?
I think a number of things really contributed to this. First, I think we got a handle on it pretty early after the initial wave when the cases first were announced and they started spreading like crazy. And and even to some extent, the state had determined that the more you close things down, the more likely you were to contain the spread of the virus. We knew, like early on, for example, that this was strictly transferred person to person. It really wasn't, there was no other vector like a mosquito or a rodent spreading it around. So human beings were the source of transmission. So the more we isolated people from each other, the more we were able to control it. And that's what we set out to do. We were able over a long period of time to watch as the governor began changing and opening more stuff up, that our cases continued to stay in the low range and cases in the rest of the state started creeping upwards. So we could actually see a clear divergent path between what we were doing and what the state was doing. So we could see that locally and we could see that nationally as well. So I think residents had a level of confidence that following what we were doing would actually lead to better outcomes. And that's the other part of this, is having people who took science seriously. I mean, most county residents understand the value of science. Most county residents are willing to listen to advice from people that's science-based. And I thought that was an enormous advantage for us. It was like a good confluence of people and leadership and also our ability to pivot some of the things we did. We had, initially relied on our own Health and Human Services department to get information out and do community work. And we pretty quickly discovered that we're not as effective as we think we are. And we continued to see numbers lagging the minority community. So we pivoted and put a lot more trust and control to some extent in these hubs that sprung up around the county, and used them because we recognized that they had more authentic connections deeper in the community than the government did. And so rather than persisting and insisting that we would do everything ourselves, we kind of let go. What the county was good at is providing resources, money and things. But there's no substitution for the authenticity of voices coming out of those communities, particularly communities that aren't always trustful of government. So I'd say a number of things worked in our favor.
Right. So one thing you've been criticized for is not issuing an employee mandate. Please comment on that.
Most of our employees were vaccinated, and the departments where we lagged in vaccination were the two departments where we could least afford to lose people. It was three departments: fire, police, and corrections. And the loss of employees there, we're already talking about, for an example, in the police department, how short-staffed we are. And losing even modest numbers of people in the police department would have been really problematic for us. And our firefighters are working on a lot of holdovers now. It means that they're not able to leave when they're supposed to leave. They're still doing a lot of overtime, and it's not the kind of overtime you volunteer for necessarily. So I did not want to take a chance on those two departments. We had been doing this for a long time. If you remember, whether vaccinated or not, our force was out there. The police were out policing, the fire department was out doing fire, the jail was operating, and we were decently staffed in the jail, except as people got sick, our staff got sick. But we hadn't had outbreaks. We hadn't had, firehouses closed because people got COVID. We didn't have stations suddenly decimated because people had been in a roll call. So whatever people were doing was safe enough to keep it from spreading, and it didn't put the county at risk. And with all the risks we were dealing with, I didn't see the point of adding additional. But at the end of the day, the council could have passed it. That's the part of, that's kind of weird in all this. I didn't veto anything. I just said you need to consider the impact on services. Maybe they prefer that I pretend there would be no impact and they would get cover. Then, of course, I would get the blame when there was impact on services. But I just kept saying, you have to think about this. So they were free to think about it and make whatever decision they wanted. And at this point, I don't actually know why you'd do that, because most people are going to get vaccinated, and they've got new vaccines coming out. You're likely to have a once-a-year vaccine coming this fall. I think we've gotten pretty far down that road, and the council members can't say that it's endemic, and at the same time insist that at this point we push. I wish everybody would get vaccinated. I will say the unions worked with us. They called their members. We were very emphatic about what you should do. And I think we wound up with, at least reasonable rates of vaccination, even if they weren't as high as they would have been if they had been mandatory.
All right, let me turn to the next topic. County in 2021 had $28 billion invested in the business community, including $800 million in venture capital funds, which is more than the rest of the state combined. How did you accomplish that?
I think it was the good fortune of being a life sciences center. And we got very aggressive about both promoting life sciences, but also making sure they wouldn't run into the kind of regulatory hurdles that they were used to running into in Montgomery County. I mean, we did not have a great reputation for the ability to speed projects, for example, through the approval process. And I can't fix park and planning, but I could fix the stuff on our side of this. And there were times when I actually was talking to the leadership of a couple of biotech companies and assuring them they didn't need to go to Frederick to get a building done quickly, that we would be able to provide the same kind of service here. And we were able to do that. So there have been real changes in how our permitting department operates, and it's much more customer friendly. It's, we load up on a front meeting at the beginning of the process so that developers can ask all the questions they have. Our staff can tell them what kind of things they're going to be looking for and what concerns they have, which makes it a lot easier for them to present the project that's likely to be approved. And if they don't get initially approved, our folks work with them to fix it. And kind of in the old days, it would be like, if you failed, it's like, call us when you're ready to try again. And that would just upset people. And we would inspect people until we found something that failed, and then they'd stop the inspection, and then they'd come back and pick up where they left off. And then when they found something else, they'd stop the inspection. And we basically said, you need to stop that. We need to give people a punch list of everything. They need to have the opportunity to fix everything. So we really made changes in how we handled the developments coming in. And so I think that, and the bioscience climate here, and the fact the feds invested, we got a large portion of that money that was targeted on vaccines. I think the county got more than the rest of the country. So we were in a really good position to take off, and we wanted to be sure that we were able to take off, and that our work just didn't extend to the vaccine companies, but to anybody out there who is doing this cutting edge scientific research. So we were very aggressive about making sure we grew that sector. It is, when you think about Montgomery County, there is no industrial sector in Montgomery County. And for years, our sector was federal government employees. We used to brag about how this county was recession proof because we had so many employees in the federal government, and there hadn't been a lot of attention to private sector stuff. And we've kind of reversed this and put a lot more attention on what it takes to bring a company here. I've approved as many or more, incentive packages for life sciences companies as anybody's ever done. When somebody says I say no to stuff, they obviously don't know my record, and they haven't paid any attention to the funds they voted for on the council, because they also have to approve all these packages. We've been very aggressive about making sure we get the jobs and the science growth that we need here. And I can talk about other stuff later.
What are your future plans as far as the business investment?
So, but there are a couple of things. First of all, um, we know, because the business community has been very clear about this, the transportation is the number one impediment to the economic growth. And in Montgomery County's transportation system, we've got Metro. Metro's got problems, but also Metro doesn't connect a lot within the county. This isn't a system where the train stops every 10 blocks and when you get off, you've got a 5-block radius around you where you can go to, all kinds of businesses. Our stations are much farther apart than, say, the New York subway. And it basically ferries people from the suburbs into the district, which, when you think about it, is what it was designed for when Metro was built. And this is, when I was growing up, some people referred to it as the white flight line, because basically it took white workers who moved out of the district at the end of the 50s and into the 60s, and they moved to the suburbs, and the Metro ferried those workers back into the federal jobs. And you could argue that that was also kind of a socially unwise policy in terms of the district, but it's, that's how that Metro was designed. But it also meant it wasn't meant to really serve growth and development of Montgomery County, which is why I pushed on a BRT network that would have 100 lane miles. It would be cross-connected, not just a couple of lines north-south. So you could basically get anywhere from any place in the county. So it was meant to feed jobs. And we were never able to fund it because the county never had the tax revenue to fund it. We flat out collect less money for transportation than Virginia does from the developers. And we can show you a study by Jones Lang LaSalle that makes the point that Montgomery County is basically the cheapest state in the region when it comes to development taxes. And what that's meant is, while Virginia builds the Silver Line and all the counties there are building bus rapid transit, and I mean real bus rapid transit, not like, a lane in mixed use on 29 so far. When they built real projects, they did it because they had a tax base that came off of commercial property that allowed them to do that. Montgomery County's never been willing to do that. The mantra has always been, well, if we spend any of our own money, the state will never give us any money. So how many years are we into this with the state never giving us any money? And we need to do what Virginia did, which is get the state legislature to give them taxing authority in a better way than we tax. So, I want to deal with the transportation. I want to deal with the tax issue. Like I said, we are cheaper than Virginia by far. The quickest example, Tyson's Corner is over $1.65 on commercial property. Downtown DC is $1.85 on commercial property. Montgomery County is like 99 cents plus the state tax. Virginia, they get 0.7 of 1 penny on their sales tax. That goes to transportation. And the counties there, like Fairfax, have a 12.5 cents on commercial property, only on commercial property, but all commercial property. And that 12.5 cent tax builds transportation. Montgomery County has nothing like that. So we lag regionally, not because we're a bad location or because of our tax policies. We have better tax policies if you only measure them by the dollar, but we don't produce value to developers for the dollars that they pay. And so we lose. Virginia builds stuff, we don't. And I'm intent on rectifying that. And that, I think we can get that done with another council that's not so political. And we'll actually have 4 years to cool their heels and to think about how do we get Montgomery County moving? Because I put a lot of thought into this, and I'm perfectly willing to change what we do and mimic some of the things Virginia does, because it actually works better. And I've adopted I tell people that if somebody's eating your lunch, you ought to look at how they got your lunch. And that's something Montgomery County's never done. And we looked at it and we understand real clearly what our advantages are and what our disadvantages are. And the irony is that changing the tax system would leave Montgomery County with as much or more money, but it would allow us to float bonds, which we can't do with our current tax structure. So we would be able to get a lot farther, a lot faster. And the other thing is, focuses around White Flint, WMATA, and life sciences. When we didn't get Amazon, which is not the end of the universe, I looked at that and, you wonder why you didn't get it, because we found out we had outbid Virginia for Amazon. We put more money on the table for Amazon than probably anybody else did. We're certainly in the top one or two, but we put more money on the table than Virginia did. But what Virginia understood that the state didn't understand here is that Amazon wanted talent. And what they offered Amazon was getting George Mason and University of Virginia close to the Amazon campus, where they would provide a steady stream of talent out of their programs there that would fuel Amazon's growth. And that excited Amazon. So also they were able to move into a built part of the city there. You know, we were offering them a lot of dirt where the Lerner property is, you know, Lord and Taylor, and 45 acres of dirt, and a lot of low-rise development, not much of an urban area. And Virginia was also able to offer them an urban area where there would be amenities and restaurants and all those things. So we weren't competitive on that. So I had started conversation with WMATA over 2 years ago, and the focus was to get them to take their kind of flagship property in White Flint and solicit a master developer to develop it as a life sciences hub. And I began talking with the private sector about what I wanted to do. So on the private sector side, every developer right now on the west side of the Pike in White Flint has life sciences projects staged to go forward. I think they took me seriously that we would actually do something here. And WMATA hired Jones Lang LaSalle to do an analysis for them. I get why they just didn't say, yeah, Mark, that's a great idea. We're sure you're right. We'll change the way we attract investment. So they asked Jones Lang LaSalle, what the highest and best use of their property was. And they came back and said, the highest and best use of your property is life sciences. And so it made WMATA comfortable with going in that direction. So we expect to see a joint solicitation for a master developer to develop their property focused on life sciences. And that puts it right on top of the metro. And this is really critical because when you think about life sciences around the country, San Francisco is hot and it's an urban area. San Diego is hot and it's an urban area. In Boston, Kendall Square is an urban area and it's one of the hottest properties in the United States. And our life sciences are primarily in office parks in Shady Grove, and they serve a purpose. But we've got an opportunity to build the center, and that's what we're hoping to achieve in White Flint, is to bring a confluence of companies close to each other in what will also be built out as an urban setting with all the attractions of urbanity. So the company won't just look at the square footage, but that they'll look at the value of the whole proposition. Where will my employees eat lunch? Can they go to dinner? Can they hang around and shop? Do they have to drive out because this is a dead zone once we close? All those things we think we can address inside a new plan. I'm sure the developers around there are going to follow that plan because life sciences is valuable to all of them. It's going to be a major growth industry in the county. And to kind of build on that, I also started going to the University of Maryland, and I pitched them on investing in life sciences in Montgomery County. And, Montgomery County's never really had a true university presence here. They participate at universities of Shady Grove. University of Shady Grove isn't a graduate level research university. And we're the only life sciences area that's not focused by a life sciences grad program at a university. Everybody else, all the other folks have it. And we're number 4 in the country. And so we've risen in an enormous way without having what some people would consider a key component. And so I started asking the university to play a role here. And I made the point that, in Virginia, they use their university system as an economic driver. They are very conscious. When Amazon said, we want talent, they just jumped to it. And they put, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into things that would provide Amazon the talent they needed. And we've never done that. We've never used the university that way. And the university hasn't seen itself that way. So after a lot of conversations, we actually signed the joint MOU with all the, the university presidents. Dr. Perman is the chancellor of the whole system, to bring graduate level research here. And not too long after that, I had a meeting with NIST and with the new director of NIST. We were talking about, where Montgomery County could go with an aid or a boost to our life sciences research. I asked her about quantum and AI, and her answer was quantum not ready for prime time yet, but AI is out there and people are using it. And then we got approached by the dean of the school at Maryland that does the artificial intelligence, and he was like, "We would like to be there." And so we started conversations with the university, and where we left it at the end of the legislative session is they want to put a facility in Montgomery County that focuses on artificial intelligence, big data, uh, focuses on aiding the life sciences. Basically, you're trying to train a new generation of scientists and how to use big data and artificial intelligence. They would also serve the hospitality industry because they had been approached at Maryland by Marriott and the other big one that we have to Choice, to help them with AI because they like AI for being able to envision environments before they build the environments. So those are two big things that we think will become centers of. And the other piece is growing other artificial intelligence companies, because big data has implications for everything we do and how we process all the information. And it's going to give a jump to technology and not just life sciences, but technology in general, because people can speed up their research. They can find out more about things than they would ever find, like I do. Like, I'm up at night at 2 o'clock Googling stuff. So it's like imagining that you had all the computing power that you could possibly assemble, Googling and sorting. We could never match that as human beings. These machines can do it, and they can do it a lot faster. So I see us, kind of helping to drive three industries here. But I think at the end of the day, the big thing is, Montgomery County has always been considered kind of sleepy and not aggressive about business attraction. I think that making a bold statement on where we're going with life sciences in this county and what we want to do, and to get an artificial intelligence hub in this county will send the signal that this county is actually serious about it. And that's my goal is, I can deal with my regulatory processes, I can fix the tax processes, but the big thing left to fix is the impression that we're serious about doing something. When people start seeing the buildings going up and the solicitations going out, they're going to get a different view of us.
Sounds good. One of the concerns that's been raised is the eastern part of the county. Can you comment on what plans you have for that?
So when I got here, there were, basically four projects that were major on the east side of the county. And there was something that wasn't yet an issue. So the first thing I did is I tackled working with Montgomery College to agree to put a campus on the east side of the county. We need it over there. We need a higher education facility. We need people to be able to get to it easily, which, if you're up on, Colesville Road, the farther you get outside the Beltway, the farther removed you are from, being able to get to any college presence, Montgomery College presence. So we're going to get, because the college has agreed to this, we're going to get a campus on the east side of the county. And I think that's going to be big. It's going to help the kids in high schools link to programs at the college that will help them. I'm hopeful. I don't run the college, but we've talked to them about focusing program development on areas in this county where we know we have job deficits, and particularly where people of color, don't have the opportunities to get jobs. And so whether it's nurses or hospital technicians, whether it's people who work in labs or do manufacturing, but don't actually need, graduate degrees or even college degrees to be techs, we want to make sure we can supply, going to the Amazon point, we want to be sure we can supply the technical training to people who, in Montgomery County, so they can get jobs, who want to do it on the east side of the county because they've kind of been neglected. And one thing that, could happen off of that is spinning off businesses on the east side of the county. So I think there's a synergy between educational development and economic development. The other thing were the economic projects on the east side of the county. When I came here, Viva White Oak was going nowhere, and that's just a fact. You haven't broken dirt on anything. They still have unresolved issues. we were told when it was approved that, development would happen almost instantly. There were all these people who were going to come here, and they didn't. It's just a fact. People can, say it's not true, but it is true. And you can go listen to the council hearings, so it's true. But they haven't approached us. They haven't approached Economic Development Corporation for any assistance on anything. So I really don't know what's going on there. I can tell you that this week we brought them a potentially large project. I can't say what it is, but if we're going to meet next week and if they're interested, we may get a breakthrough in terms of developing a big development on their property. And that would be good because I still have $40 million sitting in a fund for the infrastructure that they're going to need. And that's something that's a legacy from when I was county executive. But the other projects at the Gateway at New Hampshire Avenue, when I got here, that was stuck, not going anywhere. I sat down with our folks in transportation and our planning folks and worked with the company that was doing the development and found solutions that would work, and then supported them in front of Park and Planning, and their project is going forward. I was there this week for the announcement that their apartment buildings are going to be 100% powered by electricity, no natural gas, and one building will be entirely powered off of solar. So that's one project. There's retail and other stuff that goes along with that project. Second project was Town Center on Colesville Road, and they were also stuck between us and Park and Planning. I sat down again with the developer personally and worked with my staff to figure out how do we solve these problems. They were able to solve the problem. We got a very nice note from the developer for doing that, and they were able to move forward through Park and Planning. The third project is Burtonsville, which, as we all know, has languished, I guess, forever since the shopping center was allowed to move across the street and then abandon the relatively new shopping center that was in Burtonsville. We have a developer for our piece of land that wants to build 2 apartments and a structured parking garage. And Eden's has a deal with the grocery store now. And so that project's going to go forward. And I was, again, personally involved working with Eden's to try to move this project forward. And we're now able to move it forward. So 3 out of 4, I was able to get moving. It was not a problem working with the developer. We're still waiting for Jonathan to bring us something to work with. And if he brings us something to work with, we'll work with him like we worked with everybody else. And we're also modifying the BRT, which was, I would say, designed at a low level of efficiency. It runs in mixed traffic south of New Hampshire Avenue. And we're now doing the study to take the BRT out of mixed traffic south of New Hampshire Avenue. I've got a long-term vision that actually gets it off the shoulders as well, because that's not the best place to have it running. But I think we're going to make progress on this. We're starting to get interest from the state in helping us fund some of these projects, which we've never gotten before. So I think with the new governor, and hopefully if it's a Democratic governor, that they'll understand the value of making investments in Montgomery County. I always remind people, even folks from other jurisdictions, that you actually want Montgomery County to succeed, because a lot of the tax money the state has comes from Montgomery County. And so the more money we pour into the state treasury, the more money there is to help you with your projects. And without Montgomery County's money, then the whole state suffers from lack of resources to do the things they want to do. So they don't have to do it because they like us. They should just do it because we're all bound in this together, and they benefit from our success. And I'm happy to have them benefit from our success. I just would like them to think less parochially and more openly about how this benefits everybody in the state.
All right, let me turn to another topic. What have you done about early childhood education?
So when I ran for election, I told people I was not going to make a Christmas tree of promises, which is not exactly the most thrilling thing to tell a group of people. But I said, we're going to run out of money, and I want to make sure we can do 2 things. We can move transit forward because we weren't far enough in design, and that we would continue to invest in early childhood. So, I'm a former teacher. To me, early childhood is the absolute essential ingredient in getting all kids to grade level by the time they start kindergarten. And it is increasingly difficult to narrow gaps for children to make up for what they didn't learn the older they get. And children who start on a level playing field in kindergarten, who can, have understand letters, understand the adequate what you need to know about numbers. I'm not talking about having them at a second grade level, but just getting the basics that all of us got when we were kids makes it easier for them to access information and learn. And if they don't have that, they struggle. And I saw kids, I taught fourth and fifth grade. And I had students who were still functioning at the first and second grade level because they had never gotten the foundational stuff in the curriculum you get assumes that you've got the foundational stuff, and there's not a lot of time to teach foundational stuff in the regular curriculum. So we continued to make investments. We upped it, $5 million a year for the first 3 years, despite the really hard times that were caused in the first year by a huge budget shortfall caused by the previous budget. And then the second 2 years just by COVID and decisions that we'd limit spending to same services. But I continued to make those increases. This year we put 20 million into early childhood, and we need to increase the number of seats in the county. We need to really think about what we're doing. I am, pushing people to work with the school system. I know the school system wants to go into this space, but there's a inherent problem for you wonky people out there. A lot of childcare providers handle both infants and young kids, and children under two and under require a different ratio of staff. And so for a lot of people, that ratio would never pay for itself, that you couldn't get enough for the childcare for an infant in order to pay for the service. And so it's partly subsidized by the rates, for the older kids, so the centers can operate. If the school system tries to provide all the early childhood slots, there's not going to be any way for folks who are providing infant care to be able to support the infant care. So we want a coordinated response between the state, the county, and our private providers so that we have a balanced system that can serve everyone. I wish we could do what DC did, but I don't have a $20 billion budget. I have a $6 billion budget. That's the glory of DC being a state. They get access to stuff we can't get access to. But I think, we need to make this as affordable as possible. We need to reach as many people as possible, and we need to reach them earlier. Fourth grade is 4 years old is not early enough. 3 years old is really not early enough. We really ought to be out there in the 1 to 2, or at least the 2-year-old space, so we can make sure that we can provide 3 years of foundational learning that'll help these kids be successful. So that's something I'm committed to. I'm going to continue to work with our folks in the school and the private providers to make sure we can create a system that's inclusive and that we don't wind up robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Okay, I'm going to skip 2 topics. If we have time, we'll come back to them. One's school safety, because I know you've done a number of things about that, and affordable housing. What I want to talk about next, and racial equity, but what I want to talk about next is climate change, because I think you've done some important things there. Tell me about the climate change plans.
So when I was on the council, we passed a resolution. So the resolution came with no action items. It was just, we need to, reduce by whatever by 2027, 100% by 2035. We had no way of getting there. And I think all of us knew, and we were told that would be extraordinarily difficult lift. But a couple of us on the council, it didn't start with everybody, but a couple of us kept making the point that if you have a modest goal that you can achieve, then you may achieve that and then say, well, that's my goal for 27. And if I make it, then we're just on cruise control. And the fact is, you need a goal that it's going to be very hard to achieve. You don't set goals that you're certain of achieving if the crisis is bigger than what your certainty is. If you're in a major crisis, you set a goal to deal with the crisis and you move as far down that track as you can go, but you at least want to be in a situation where you can never look at what you've done and say, done enough. That's what the plan said. We do this by this year. And, it was a safe, attainable goal, and we're done with it. So we had a very aggressive plan instead. And my first year in office, we created the citizens group to go out and, bring back information and help us craft the kind of things that should go in a plan. And I'm a big believer in doing that. I didn't want to start with a consulting firm. I wanted to end with that. I didn't want to start with it. And I got criticized because I took money for what I think some people call the climate czar out of the budget. This was a budget that I had cut $90 million out of because of the revenue shortfall we had. And I felt that since we didn't have any plans yet, what I needed to do is to get the plan, and I could save money by not hiring somebody who would basically have nothing to do. And so we focused the money on things the budget needed, but we kept this citizen group working to provide a plan. They gave us their report. That went over to the consultant that we did hire at that point, and they helped us prioritize and develop a plan. The first draft I thought was a little not as specific as it needed to be. The second draft addressed that. It's still a very aggressive plan. And my charge to my staff has always been, don't write a plan that you think will get passed. Don't make those compromises. Write the plan that we need and let other people compromise it. But don't compromise it ourselves, because all of that means is you're going to get less than you need. So let's have the full discussion about a plan, and let's talk about what's going to be needed in the plan. And that's kind of been our approach, is to not compromise things. So when we get to the present, when we did the International Green Building Code, we were already under the Green Building Code, but major compromises were made to that bill when it was passed when I was on the council. And the administration sent over a bill that was a lot weaker than what the original language was. When it came to my staff this time, I said, don't weaken anything. If somebody wants to weaken it, let them weaken it, and then everybody will know that it was weakened. But I do not want that done by our hands. And so we didn't weaken anything, and the council passed a very, very strong green building code. And we did the same thing on building energy performance standards. We put out very, very aggressive standards with the same direction. No watering down, no pre-cuts in our shop. Let them see what we need to do, and let us have a discussion of what we need to do. That's one of the dangers when people anticipate opposition and you start watering stuff down. You never know whether you actually either could have won the argument, convinced people that this was important to do this way. You've already ceded that ground, and I didn't want our folks ceding any ground on this. So we put forward a pretty aggressive plan. And so we've got a green building code for new buildings. We've got the BEPS, building energy performance standards, for existing buildings. The council's put money aside and some direction on, especially trying to target money on low-income housing, for example, where that could, if you noticed our climate plan, the first chapter is about equity. We do not want to displace people in the name of climate change. I'm not interested in, fixing up a building and then saying, oh, so sad, these people can't afford to live here anymore. That would be, I think, really tragic, and it would be very bad for the county. So we'll have money in the plan to help with transitions for both the private sector and for affordable housing nonprofits, so they can make this transition. And I will say that, technological changes have made things that we didn't even think about 3 years ago as being possible are starting to come into sight. So our bus fleet will be electrified, and our vehicle fleet in general will be electrified. The schools took advantage of a program that I told them about that involves, tax credits and basically leasing the buses from a company that can use all the tax credits, which the government can't use. We don't get tax credits because you don't pay taxes. And so the tax credits go to an investor, and we get a lower price on the vehicles to offset some of the price difference between an electric vehicle and a non-electric vehicle. And we're looking at that in principle for other purchases where we don't need to own the asset. We just need to get a cleaner asset We've got, or we've done some solar. We have the biggest affordable solar project, I was told, in the country, out at Oaks landfill. It was sadly limited to 6 megawatts. It could have been more than 3 times that big. But because of state regulations, it limited the size of community solar. They just raised the limits to 5. And for each, so we had 3 sites out there. We're going to go back and we're going to apply for upping the solar output in all 3 of those to reach what we think we can attain. All our buildings, new buildings will be net zero. Other buildings are being renovated under the same principle as building energy performance standards to bring them up the code. So I can say we're being really aggressive about this. We've hired hydrologists to work with us in identifying our weaknesses in terms of flooding and where the floodplains are, and what we need to do. And you got to look at this bigger than the street that floods, because you've got to look at the whole watershed that's directing all the water to the places that flood, which is what we're going to be doing. And so they're already prioritizing areas and identifying high priority projects that need to be done right away. So I'd say that we're pretty deep into this. We're redoing our waste facility in order to shut down the incinerator as soon as the council and I adopt a plan, which will not involve incineration. Then we will trigger the timeline for shutting the incinerator down. We're going to, use that hopefully to put solar fields where the incinerator is right now. We've started a food composting pilot that's actually become a food composting policy for private and residential uses. And we believe that it has potential to be used in a digester to be able to produce a clean fuel that we can run our buses on. And at worst, we'll get good compost that has high value because it has not just leaves and mulch, but it's actually now enhanced by organic matter, other organic matter. So I'm optimistic about where we're going. And our goals for 2027 are tough. We're going to get a boost from the auto industry as they shift over to electric cars. I mean, there are sectors that I'm pretty sure we can get to. If we don't achieve the goal by 27, we can certainly get our goals by 2035. I think buildings, residential and commercial are manageable, and I think vehicles are manageable, particularly if the dealers only sell electric cars. That makes this really simple. But I think that the problem is the grid, and the grid is over 30% of our energy, and most of our grid is natural gas, coal, and nuclear, with a smattering of solar and wind. But Montgomery County becomes the buyer for all electricity in Montgomery County as soon as the new regs are approved. We're a pilot for a community choice energy, and we're going to be the pilot in the state, and we'll have the entire buying power of Montgomery County that we can put out there to solicit bids from energy companies. And I've already been approached by some clean energy companies of their interest in this and about supplying us. And so I'm sure we're going to be walking into a competitive market. When you've got 1 million residents, you've got, almost 400,000 residential buildings and tons of commercial buildings. Somebody's going to want this business. And I think that being in the position to consciously favor things that are clean may help us speed the transition to clean energy in Montgomery County. And one reason I'm motivated, I put solar on my roof a little less than 2 months ago, and I'm already seeing that this is going to pay for itself. It is pretty remarkable, and there are a whole lot of rooftops that could do this. Where the county has to get involved, then we get into the cost of putting this together. And I would love to have the grid go clean quicker. And that's what community choice energy could get us, so that I could focus the money we need to invest on helping people transition their buildings, because that's not going to be a cheap proposition for a lot of people. And if I don't have to build the clean energy, if I can buy the clean energy and residents can make individual choices, which I hope they continue to do to accelerate the clean energy at the home level, I think we actually have a path to getting there. So we'll know in a year or so what we can get on the market. More clean energy is coming on the market every year. So this is far different than even what it was 3 years ago. So I'm an optimist.
Sounds like you've got an awful lot going to address climate change, and I'm impressed.
Can I make a point about that real quickly?
Sure.
So we've talked about a lot of stuff we're doing, and I want to point out to people that as disruptive as COVID was, and a lot of places just weren't able to manage it. They managed COVID, but a lot of other things went by the wayside. We made a decision, and I told people in the very beginning, I told them every problem that was facing us when I got elected is going to be staring at us when we get out of COVID. So I wanted everybody to keep planning and figuring out what we would do and how we'd move the needle forward. And whenever we had the opportunity to move the needle forward and not wait till the end of the COVID and say, okay, COVID's over, now we're going back to work. Everybody's job in the real world on addressing real challenges remained the same during COVID. And we continued to work as we could and still manage this miserable disease.
Yeah, I think that sounds impressive. As I say, if we had time, I would have us talk about school safety, because I know you've done quite a few things there, affordable housing, racial equity, but because I know you need to be going, we will have to pass on those, but I know you've accomplished quite a bit on those fronts as well.
So if we like, we can come back and do another segment, maybe a half hour focused on housing and some of this other stuff.
Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.